every time I come to Kansas, I get invited to Kansas a lot, and every time I'm here, I'm like, I love Kansas, and I want to stay. Like, it's a legitimate thing. Like, I never tell my friends from the East Coast about how great Kansas is, because I don't want them to come and ruin this state, and like move here. It's fantastic. The bar is open, so please get your wine if you need to while I'm speaking to get you through the next 15 or 20 minutes or so. I love that they put the priest table right in front of the bar. I'm like, I see you, brothers. I'm coming for you right after this. I want to pick up a couple things from last year that I shared. I know I rarely come back to an event 2 years in a row. And as Sister Dana Marie said, the only reason I'm here is because of Emily's prayers. Like, I say no when I'm asked to come back to a place. I'm like, someone should come in who has a different perspective, or you want a different speaker. But Emily came to me what felt like 17 times. I think it was about 3 times, saying, like, it keeps coming up my prayer, Father. The Lord is telling me you're supposed to be here. And, like, she's never wrong in prayer. So I'm here because Emily prayed. And I want to lead with that by saying I trust this woman's prayer, and I trust what she's doing, and I trust what she's building with the help of her team, and I delight that it's here. And I want to just speak into the place that Fiat sits in the very broad view of the church right now, which is a time of both poverty and renewal. On the renewal side, we just had the Eucharistic Congress this past summer in Indianapolis. Some of you were able to go, but that was an event that surprised everybody. The intensity of the grace of the Holy Spirit that was for the entire church in America. It was much more anointed than people expected. Then this next coming year, this 2025, will be a Jubilee year of grace, which is a global event for the church. It happens every 25 years when everything focuses on begging for new graces and graces of renewal. So we sit in this time, like in America coming off the Congress, moving into next year, a year of grace, it's just a time that's ripe and filled with grand possibility, and we've got to be really optimistic in searching out that grace because of the poverty. And the poverty of the church is very deep. The need to be renewed, the need to be made new again. We all, and I referenced some of this last year, but we look at the way the church is working today, and very rarely are we like, yeah, everything's going great. Church is healthy. Nothing's wrong here. Nobody look underneath the hood. Like, it's a messy church, and it's always been that way. But it's also something about the way we're doing the church today just doesn't feel right, doesn't fit right. And we've got a tremendous set of apostolates and ministries and programs and solutions that have come up to present us with a way to do discipleship and to do organizational health and to be concerned for the good of the church. But many of these programs and models and best practices don't get at the heart of the church itself. Or I should say, and I mean to say, the church herself. Because the church is not just an institution that we can try and figure out how to get our balanced budget correct, and then we'll run through these sets of programs and everything will be dandy. The church is something so much different than any other institution in the world, and we typically forget that. Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict back in 1986, he wrote an essay that was published in Communio, and he said this, and I've sat with it, it's haunted me ever since I read it. The church is not a mechanical entity. The church is not a mere institution. It's not one of the usual sociological realities. The church is a person. The church is a woman. She is a mother. She is alive. The church is a woman, she is a mother, she is alive. The Marian understanding of the church is the most decisive antithesis to a purely organizational or bureaucratic conception of the church. The worst thing we do in the church is become organizational and bureaucratic. Things dry up and die when we build out big offices and we march through things like any other bureaucracy. The antithesis, Ratzinger said back in '86, is the Marian dimension of the church. That we would remember that the church is a bride, the church is a mother, that she is alive. And those ideas, as attractive as they can be, and how they're suitably theological, these are profoundly biblical ideas, but they're very hard to understand. They're very hard to grasp and see as we look out at the parish, or we look at the diocese, or we look at the church in America, or in Rome. We don't see the church through that lens. It's hard to understand what it means that the church is a woman, the church is a bride, the church is a mother. It's hard to see that until we see someone who's living that. Until we see someone who is living as a bride and a mother in a way that helps us understand that the bridegroom is Jesus. And the children that the church is meant to bear are the sons and daughters of a good God who's in love with us. And we can think about the church that way, but that's hard to grasp. And then we see it lived in a consecrated woman, and all of a sudden theological ideas take on flesh. All of a sudden Mary, so beautifully important to us, but also sometimes just a statue, becomes alive as we see someone who tries to live the way that Mary lives, who tries to embody what it means as members of the body of Christ to be spouse, to be mother. And these very important ideas, they lose traction if we do not have women witnessing to it and living it throughout the church. Because the church is a bride, is a mother, but often that doesn't make sense. I said this last year and I want to repeat it. It doesn't make sense to us today, often, because of what started to happen in the 60s and the 70s when we lost, or when religious life was decimated. And what I said last year, I'll say again, we have never recovered from the loss of women religious, and the church bears a sickness that is beyond organizational and bureaucratic. It's a metaphysical sickness. It's an ailment that we can barely name, but we know something's wrong. The church, the way that she is built, structured, organized today, is based on something that's been there from the beginning, which is that alongside our clergy, we would have women consecrated to God, showing us that it's not the men alone and the women alone, that there's a complementarity on the supernatural plane that reflects what we see lived in marriage, the complementarity of the man and the woman, the bridegroom and the bride, the mother and the father, that all of these things have spiritual, supernatural components and correlates, and when we don't see them both, we forget, and then we shift. I want to just show a graphic that I didn't have last year. If you could pull up that first slide. These are stats gathered from Decisive. This is the Pew Research Forum as well as CARA stats that just show you the number of religious sisters that we had in the United States in 1965 down to 2023. Those are the latest stats we have. That is a decimation of women's religious life. In the 60s, many of our parishes were built or expanded. Our churches were opened. That's a time when the church looked very different than today. And we're trying to make things run without something that we've had since the beginning. Just today, I was looking at stats in the official Catholic directory. I was looking at your stats for the Diocese of Wichita, just because I wanted to get a good sense for the numbers. You have about 108,000 Catholics in Wichita. There are 100 active priests and about 30-some retired priests. There are 27 sisters that are active in parish life. To 108,000 Catholics, 27 sisters in schools or in parishes. By the percentages, that's 0.16% of what's happening in the life of the church here. 0.16% of the people in Wichita are religious sisters. That's one sister to 642 people. So you think about the church that's built this way, or was running, operating freely, not perfectly, but in a certain freedom in the 60s that was full of life, and since then has slowly churned to a halt. In no small part because we lost sisters. There's a religious sister, a friend of mine, who wrote a very beautiful article, but it's very aggressive, very direct. She called it Ladies First. And she was talking about the scandal in the church and the priesthood and the loss of priests and what's been decimated by all the scandal stuff that surrounded the scandals in 2002, 2003, and then 2018. And she said, you know what the thing is? Ladies went first. She said Eve went first in sin, and then Adam followed her. Women have often led men in ways that the men followed into sinful things. And she said, I have to say, as a woman, a religious woman, I believe my sisters did that. That the crisis came to my sisters first, and then it came to the priesthood. If you go to the next slide, these are the numbers currently, back to 1970, of religious and priests. That bottom line is priests in America. So we talk about a priestly vocations crisis, that we don't have enough priests, and we need more priests. But that bottom line is actually not that bad, and it's actually leveling out. The top line, that's a nearly 45-degree angle decline from the 60s, starting in 1970, those stats. The crisis in women's vocations is the much bigger elephant in the room than we're ever really able to name. Even as we talk about priestly vocations, we have done a great job in the U.S. to get our seminaries to where they should be. We've done visitations. We've fixed up a lot of the way we do vocations work. You got Father Garrett Burns, which is a great last name here in the diocese, doing great work in the House of Formation, the House of Discernment. But you know, back in the day, and this day, like not too long ago day, we didn't have diocesan vocation directors. You didn't have priests assigned to this work. You didn't need them. Because you had sisters in every single classroom talking to every single boy and every single girl about all the vocations. And at a young age, it was just in the fiber of the church to consider consecrated life, priesthood and religious life. You didn't need priests to be doing that because the sisters were better at it than we were, and it's just what they did you couldn't escape the sisters without them asking if you had a vocation. And most people said no, and they got married. And those who were called said yes. And we had these numbers. You take those sisters out of that classroom, just after the 70s especially became normative to have diocesan vocation directors. The dilemma is nobody ever picked up the slack on the women's side. Diocesan priests got good at diocesan work to help young men discern the priesthood, and young men always see priests. But in the interim, nobody said, hey, now that the sisters are gone, who's taking care of the ladies? Who's taking care of the girls? Who's inviting them to consider this? And it just kind of slipped through the cracks for a couple decades. And you fast forward a couple of decades, and you have communities that had to close, had to die, or are dying because of a lack of vocations. And you have in the church what really is a crisis in motherhood. See, we're always going to have priests. We're always going to have fathers in the church. We're going to have priests and popes and bishops and archbishops who represent a fatherly mode. Anywhere there's a church, anywhere there's a territory, there's a parish. But we don't have mothers anymore in the way that we're meant to and we're supposed to. We have natural mothers, beautifully, wonderful lay women living the vocation of marriage, and women serving in our schools and doing tremendous work to mother hearts and souls. But we do not have supernaturally consecrated mothers any longer. And the crisis in the church, in no small way, is a crisis of motherhood, as it's a crisis in the culture of femininity. Sister referenced this in passing, and I referenced it last year as well. But our culture is so confused about what a woman is. And when you look at the trans crisis, I started to say this last year, you look at what's happening in the trans movement, you have men who are dressing up like women and making a mockery out of femininity. And you have women who hate their bodies and are literally tearing them apart surgically to get away from womanhood. And so on one hand, it's a flight from womanhood. On the other hand, it's a flight toward mocking womanhood. And this goes back to the beginning when God said, between the serpent and the woman, there will be war until the final day. It's in the book of Revelation that war culminates as the serpent comes after the woman, who is Our Lady. And I really believe that the serpent has been after our consecrated women, decade after decade, generation after generation. And I believe the devil, who's like a sniper, he goes for what's most important. He sought out the woman, and if he could take out of the church the woman who shows the church who the church is, the church will forget who she is. And then the priesthood will eventually forget who we're meant to be. Years ago, Cardinal Burke was speaking. He was giving a talk at a convent, and he said to the sisters there, he said, you know, you're doing beautifully. They're habited and they're living their lives wonderfully. He said, but my brothers, the priests got sick when sisters took off their habits. And they said, what do you mean, Your Eminence? He said, because the sisters took off their habits and we lost the sign of the bride. He said, priests could no longer see the bride, and so they forgot that they were bridegrooms. They were meant to be espoused to the church. They lost their mooring. Another priest friend of mine said they became like single dads, trying to run parishes and run communities and make it work without mom. I quoted my friend last year who said that the church without sisters is like a family without a mother. And when mom's gone, it's like hot dogs and mac and cheese, you know? It just doesn't work. Sorry, dads. Like, it's not our thing. And the restoration of the church, which is not a mechanical entity, which is a bride, that restoration happens by the restoration of women's religious life. Now, I spend my days on this question. I travel the country speaking. I do a lot of work with women religious, a lot of work with priests, and then a lot of work with dioceses, trying to help them realize that if we don't pick up this slack, no one will. If we don't figure out a way to talk about this in our schools, in our communities, in our parishes, these young women are not going to experience or understand what's happening as they experience the call of God. If they haven't seen it, how could they feel that they're called to it, as Emily said? And I'm totally convinced at the Eucharistic Congress this summer, the number one thing people said coming out of the Congress, of all walks of life, was, can you believe how many sisters there are here? And isn't it wonderful to see the sisters? There were so many different habits from so many different orders from all over the country. I had people of older generations coming to me in tears during the Congress and say, Father, I didn't know there still were sisters like this. And I wish my daughters could have seen that. I want my grandchildren to see that. I didn't know about this. And they said, what can we do, Father? I get calls from all over the country because of this work. I've referenced this a lot, but people are like, you work with all the sisters. Can you help me get sisters? I'm like, everybody wants the sisters, guys. They don't, what do you want me to do, conjure up a new convent for you? No woman wakes up dressed like this and is like, oh, yes, so today I'm going to be a sister for the rest of my life. The vocations come from families and from parishes, which takes decades to turn the culture of a community and to realize that we here in Wichita, here in this parish, in this family, we have an opportunity to respond to a broad need of the church. The church is crying out for women religious. The church is begging for sisters. These communities have waiting lists, long waiting lists of dioceses and parishes and schools who say, would you come and open a convent? They're like, yes, send us your girls and we'll send them back. Give us 7 years. And everybody says, well, that's too much to ask. Just send sisters. Like, well, it doesn't work that way, guys. We've got to decide that if we want sisters, and if we want to restore the church's, our awareness of the church's bridal identity and maternal identity, so we don't end up with a bureaucratic conception or a huge, nasty office building with lots of budgets, we're going to need to do something about that starting on the ground level. And I'll tell you, like I said, I trust Emily's prayer deeply. And I trust deeply in what Fiat is doing. In most of the church, everybody talks about the sisters, and they talk about it with happy memories. They say, wasn't that great? Remember the sisters? I loved having the sisters, and sister so-and-so, and sister so-and-so, and yeah, a ruler came out once in a while. For the record, it was very rare, and the other teachers were using rulers too. The sisters get a bad rap. But the truth is, most of the church is stuck in nostalgia. They're happy to remember and happy to say, wasn't that great, and don't you wish? But rarely does the church move into action and say, let's not just look backwards and say, I wish the numbers are where they were. What if we had to think of creative solutions from outside of the box, where we had to say, you know what? The sisters aren't here doing that work anymore. How can we bring them back? How can we raise these questions? How can we build something that would fit into a gap that the whole church recognizes but often can't name? And as I've said, I do this work across the country. I do all kinds of work with different groups that are trying to find solutions. I don't think there is a better solution to this problem than Emily Savage and Fiat Ministries. I do not believe, yes. And here's what you guys, I can be direct because I'm not from here and I'm leaving in like 7 hours. You do not appreciate how blessed you are to have this here in Wichita, and you do not realize that you have a duty to the church to make sure that it gets far beyond Wichita. This is a ministry that is not designed to stay here, and the entire church needs it. I do not exaggerate when I say that every diocese should have an Emily Savage and a Fiat Ministries. I mean that to the core of my being. This, yes. And you are here, 460-some people, because you say, yeah, we want to support you, Emily. And support, of course, means financial giving and helping numbers match up and meet the budget and surpass, hopefully, what their dreams and expectations are. Emily Savage and her team have dreamed up some remarkable things for the next 10 years. You see the card in front of you with the retreats and the mother-daughter stuff and moving down into high school and youth ministry. Emily is thinking at a total meta level, and the Lord is giving to her ideas that I've been looking for and searching for and naming as a need throughout the country and throughout the world. We don't have someone doing exactly what she's doing in the whole church. So we have got to figure out how we can help move this into a ministry that is, yes, based in, founded in, always has its roots in Wichita. But it needs to be a ministry that serves the church in the U.S. and eventually will become a model for the churches in Europe and the West that have lost their way. This way of building up a culture of vocations is the only answer to what happened when we lost the sisters, to bring sisters back in for retreats and to go back to the sisters, to remind families and to give them resources, to talk about these things ad nauseum at times until we start to realize, oh yeah, if I don't do something about it, it's not going to change. It might be me, it might be my sister, it might be my daughter who's called, and I've got to be willing. And so we've got to get upset about the crisis in the church and the problem. We've got to do that in the context of this profound moment when there is a clear call on God's heart to renew his church. And we've got to see that he has awakened something here in Wichita that is meant to go forth. I trust Emily completely. It's why I'm here, 2 in a row. I trust her prayer. And I absolutely resonate to the core of my being with what she's dreaming up. Because it's not just retreats. It's not just a little book here and there. It's not just a mother-daughter tea. It's a paradigm. It's a mindset. And I'm sick of searching out solutions and programs. We need paradigm shifts. And the shift has to be to the heart. We have to realize that the church is so poor that she's on the verge of dying in many places. And she's poor because she's forgotten herself. The priesthood is atrophying. Marriage is atrophying. The whole church atrophies when we do not have healthy, holy, vibrant, consecrated women who show us what every single one of these consecrated women show us, which is that it's worth giving everything to God. In the words of Cardinal Willett, no one marries a dead man. And you sisters show us that you've married someone who's alive even if we can't see him. And that makes us want to pursue that man who's alive and live for him and live for heaven. So I can be bombastic and I can be hyperbolic because I don't believe I'm exaggerating when I say what you guys are doing here is much bigger than you realize. And if you come with Emily and with her board and with her team and you stand with her and you say, how can we help? How can we grow this? How can we help you scale up? We will hear about that on Judgment Day from the Lord in thanksgiving. He will speak to us about the fact that we have assisted him in fulfilling a divine desire that the church once again would radiate, would provide for a confused and lost world a beacon of hope, and would answer a grand and deep question about what it means to be a woman, a bride, and a mother. And that restoration, restoring and renewing religious life, will restore and renew the priesthood. It will restore and renew marriage. It will restore and renew the whole church. And the church is here to heal the nations. So I know you might think you just came for a dinner, and you did in a way. And I know I'm speaking hyperbolically or very aggressively or in big terms, but I mean every word I say, and I'll fight for these words, and I'll take them with me to the grave. You guys are part of a very privileged moment in a massive movement of renewal. Come into it as far as you can, and let the Lord inflame your heart with a willingness to run with this group and run with this team, because the church is desperate, the nation is desperate for what's going on right here. You can't keep this to yourselves. You've got to cherish what it is, and you've got to look broadly and say, God has done this here in Wichita for the sake of the whole church. I am honored to have walked with you in a little way, Emily, these years, and to be with you for 2 in a row. I promise I won't be here next year. I can't promise, because she may pray about it. But let me say to you, the church thanks you. The church thanks you for having fostered this and let Emily's dream, which is from God, come forth for the local church. The church thanks you for everything that's meant to come of this. And in advance, priests around the nation, vocation directors, families, communities, we thank you for everything that will come if you let God continue to lead you and you allow him to inflame your hearts the way that he has inflamed her heart. So please, give the Lord space to speak to your heart tonight, tomorrow, through the weekend, about the renewal of the church and the renewal of religious life. And give the Lord room to inflame your heart about his desire to renew his church, and that he has inspired Fiat Ministries here in Wichita for the sake, health, and well-being of the entire church. Big words, I know, and I stand by them, and I know that they are true. God bless you all. Great to be with you. Thank you.